Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Steve Walling, Central Valley Business. My guest is Dr. Hedberg.
That's right.
And you wrote a new book. You've been here before with other books?
We've been here before. This is my 8th book.
This is your 8th book, Johnathan Edwards, A Life Well Lived. Who is Johnathan Edwards, and why do we want a book on him, and why would a psychologist be writing the book?
Well, it's an interesting question, isn't it? Johnathan Edwards, 1700.
Okay.
Lived until 1758, and lived at a time that was very exciting.
Yeah.
A lot of things taking place in America. That was the time when George Washington was born, Benjamin Franklin. The slave industry was coming to a conclusion soon thereafter. It was a time the tea was introduced into America. Isaac Watts was writing his hymns at the time. Yale was being formed. In fact, Johnathan Edwards' wife's grandfather started Yale.
Really?
That was the time when Princeton was started. It was a time of the Great Awakenings. It was really a great time in history.
So he's kind of a key figure that a lot of people don't know a lot about.
And we should know about that. To understand that time of history, you have to understand some of the characters that played the role in that time of history, and he is certainly one of them. I also think that he was a man of great ability. It's interesting what some people have said about him. This is what the Hollister History of Connecticut said about the most gifted man in the 18th century, perhaps the most profound thinker in the world. The president of Princeton University, sometime back, McCosh, said this: the greatest thinker America has ever produced.
Well, Doc, I want to ask you, that sounds like an awesome resume, if you will. Why don't we know more about him?
Well, we do know quite a bit about him. A lot of people have written on him. The problem is his handwriting and his detail and his language and his use of words was so profound and above most people. It was hard to understand.
Okay.
And they're being now rewritten, being reinterpreted by a number, and I'm one of those, is to take his work and try to bring it to the common people.
Okay, and what is his basic message that we're looking at here?
Well, I think he has a couple different messages. One is God is sovereign.
Okay.
That's what he preached. God is sovereign in all acts and all phases of life. So that was his main theme in his sermons. By his way, his sermons were about an hour to 15 minutes long.
Well, there you go.
So they were, you went and you sat and you listened. The other was that God was the embodiment of grace, that people had opportunity because of God's grace. And then his third point was live godly. Use God's principles and the biblical principles as a way of life, and we'll get along better, and we'll do well in our life. We'll do well in our culture. And those are really the three things that he preached, and he preached, and he preached over and over again.
Now I'm going to ask you, you mentioned that the Great Awakening.
Great Awakening, yes.
And that was a very, in American religious experience, that was a very important time. There was a lot that went on. He was a key factor in that. And it resonated throughout generations, didn't it?
Oh, it did. In fact, that was the main Great Awakening was 1734.
Right.
When hundreds and thousands of people turned to God and turned to religion and entered into the church. And the church really grew and became very strong, during that year, or those years. And then there was another Great Awakening after that. And then there have been several of them even after that, smaller ones, if you will. But the Great Awakening was 1734. And he was a leader of that. George Wakefield was a leader of that. But it was a time to really bring the message of God to the people and say, here is the way to live. And people really responded.
Now, Doc, as a deep thinker and deep writer, and and you're sharing and what I'll say, kind of translating his thoughts into the vernacular of the day, so to speak. People of the time, that type of deep thinking and stuff must have, because a lot of those people were illiterate.
They were farmers. Many were farmers. They were just dock workers, if you will.
How did a man like him bring that message to common people to where it touched them the way it did?
I think it was partly his person.
Yeah.
That he related to people, and he was able to speak their language. He was able to translate it downward into their language. His writings are at a much higher level than was his actual preaching and speaking. So he was able to kind of translate that down. In fact, in the later years of his life, he left the church and became a missionary to Indians.
Did he really?
So he used an Indian to translate for him and to help him understand the Indian language, so that he would preach in the vernacular of the Indian and use illustrations that would be appropriate to the Indian. So he was able to make that cultural shift.
So he could speak to the Native Americans
in their language in a way that they would understand and be able to respond.
Now, what part of the country or the future country, because it wasn't our country at that time, did he live and do his ministry in?
Well, Connecticut and then Massachusetts.
Okay, so he was
Born in Connecticut, and then his main ministry was in the area of Massachusetts, Northampton, Massachusetts.
Okay.
And I actually visited his areas. I took last summer, took a whole week, went to his birthplace, went to all the churches he served, went to the Yale University where he went to school, went up to Northampton where he preached for some 25 years, and actually got a feel of his life and met with people that obviously didn't know him, but knew relatives of his.
What drew you to write this book?
Well, a psychologist doesn't usually write a book on a historical figure. But, psychology draws from a lot of different subjects. So we learn from many, many different subjects, and this is one way to learn as a psychologist. But a psychologist also contributes to many different fields of study.
That's true.
We have a lot to contribute. So when I wrote this book, I tried to bring it to the social scientists of all kinds, that they would get a sense of this part of history and this man and his thinking, and apply that, to their own life. So I think he has a message for us, and I think that this is what a psychologist, can do. And then the third thing is a psychologist really does try to understand why people do what they do and what makes them tick, if you will.
Yeah.
Why was this man so bright? Why did this man have 1,400 descendants that were all leaders of our world, that created our world? They were in engineering, they were in teaching and university instruction, math.
Be fruitful and multiply.
They sure did. They were in medicine and all fields of life.
We have a picture of him, Bill, that we can put up here. This that's him. Is this what the book cover is going to look like?
Yes.
Now, I say what it's going to look like because the book's coming out. It's
The
not
book's
out
coming
yet.
out. Yeah, this is a pre-publication point at this time. We
Right.
should have it out in about a month.
And we're going to have some kind of a big do over this, aren't we?
Well, we are. We're going to take this across the country and kind of introduce this so that
you're
people
taking
can
it-
have a chance to participate in learning about this man and what he contributes to our world today.
Right. So you're going to take it from Fresno out to the world.
Why not?
Well, that's great. It keeps you very involved in many different levels. When you were writing this, and you said, your market is a wide range. It's not written just for ministers. It's written for business people and psychologists and
Right.
and various other people. This must have been. You said you traveled around the country. How long did you do this, and how did this affect you personally?
Well, actually, I wrote it, it took about a year.
Okay.
To writing it, and I wrote it in bits and pieces, obviously, as you do, and you then
Right.
piece it together. But it really does have a profound effect on me. It reintroduced me to history, as a student.
Yeah.
And it reintroduced me to a time in history that, you kind of overlook. You know about George Washington, you know about
Right.
Benjamin Franklin, but you kind of overlook that time in history.
Okay.
So now I really kind of understand really what took place in the 1700s. And then the Revolutionary War came at the end of that time.
That's right.
So you have a kind of a sense of history there. But the other is, here's a man that has a profound message for one's own faith and one's development of one's faith. And that, I think, had a profound effect on me, to kind of believe that, God really is real. He really does work in the lives of people. And his message that God is sovereign is really something to kind of think about and to attune yourself to, and to look for the events of the world that we are now seeing, that this is unfolding on some kind of a general design, an overall plan of some kind, which we may not understand, and he may not have fully understood. But he believed that that was the case.
Well, good deal. Sounds like a great book. I'm looking to see the publication of it.
You will.
And you're going to have
You
a
will.
great trip taking it around the country. Heck of a deal. All
Thank
right.
you.
We'll see you when we come back.